Greetings. This is Jay. This is Pro Golf Critic of Golf Lovers United. We've got a little bit of a special episode today. This is me flying solo. The parents are on vacation. I've got the whole run of the house, run of the studio. And I think this is going to be a really interesting episode. It might be great. It might be terrible. I'm not entirely sure. This is the first time I've ever done anything like this, flying solo without a host or a co-host or anything like that. However, I think there's some really important things that I kind of want to get across. And I feel like this is really the only way for me to do that. So, a couple of things. One, I think it's a little bit, I think there's been a little bit of confusion out there in terms of why we started this podcast, why I wanted to be part of it. To me, the primary reason is one, I feel like during the last couple of years, I've had a voice in sort of this PGA Tour LIV saga that, obviously is going to keep going for a little while. The merger deadline got extended by another few months. It is what it is. One of the things that I have noticed is the fact that I have been privy to a lot of information during the last couple of years. And I just feel like, again, it goes back to the golf media not really fully covering this and sort of analyzing this at a certain aptitude that I would expect. And look, we've already gone over all the reasons why that is the case. We could talk about the corrupt golf media, which we will at a later date. Except this particular podcast is really going to be me sort of giving you guys a brain dump. I have written, obviously, a ton of articles in the past, and we'll continue to do that. I also realize that some of our audience, not really readers, so you're not going to necessarily read my stuff, which is totally fine. This is going to be another way to sort of convey some of the points that I kind of want to get across. So, this particular podcast really comes down to two things that I kind of want to break down that, for some reason, look, I consume a lot of golf content. I read voraciously when it comes to anything related to professional golf, all that stuff. And I've just felt like this information has not really been out there. So there's really two things that I want to kind of get across in this particular podcast. And I'm going to try to take it slow. I have a reputation for talking very, very fast. I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit. I'm going to try to maybe double down and sort of double click on some of the things that I talk about, just to sort of lean into it a little bit more so that everybody's able to understand it a little more than you would normally if I sort of breeze through it. So there's really two things that I want to talk about. One pertains to this merger between the PGA Tour, the DP World Tour, and LIV Golf. A lot of people are calling it NuCo. A lot of people, well, really only me, are calling it umbrella organization because it is this umbrella that's sort of hovering over all of these assets that exist between LIV, the PGA Tour, and the European Tour / DP World Tour. And look, I have done a lot of analysis of this. I've talked to folks in the private equity world. I'm coupling that with all the information that I have about professional golf. I'm also combining that with my personal knowledge of the economics of sport, economics of business, sort of how these things generally work. And look, I'm certainly not an expert on sort of mergers and acquisitions, although I have been a part of sort of many at this point in my career. So I have a general idea of how these things go. I have also sought the sort of counsel and sort of information from a lot of folks that have participated in those particular conversations, those particular mergers and acquisitions and such. And I do think that, sort of combining everything together I sort of have a unique perspective on this that I think can kind of give everybody a little more of a feeling of how this is going to play out. Look, I got to give a disclaimer. This might be completely wrong, but I do think that with all the knowledge and sort of information that I've gathered over the last 2 years, in addition to all of the information that I've gathered more recently when it comes to the merger specifically, and just sort of how, again, the economics of sport, professional sport works, I think I'm onto something. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from people around the industry is that this is like kind of where things are going to go. So, look, there's a lot of ways this can go in the next few months, except I think this is really intended to be food for thought for everyone. So, first off, I want to go a little bit and talk a little about me. Obviously, a lot of people have been following me now for a fair amount of time. Where I went to college, where I'm from. I don't really have to go into any of that stuff. The thing that's sort of more relevant to this particular conversation is sort of obviously I'm super passionate about professional golf. I've gone in, talked about that ad nauseum at this point. But going all the way back to being a kid, really going back to high school and college, I've been really interested in the economics of sport. There was sort of a parallel universe where, I might have been working for a sort of NBA team in their basketball operations divisions. And look, there were conversations had sort of early on in the 2000s, but it didn't really work out for a variety of reasons. One, because I don't believe in working for free, and I wasn't going to do that. But I do think that the thesis that I wrote in college definitely caught the attention of a few folks around basketball, where I talked about the net worth of college basketball players. And I talked about the economics of the NBA and sort of how things break down, and how there is this sort of generally 50-50 split between the sort of ownership investment group and then also the talent when it comes to the players that are actually out there that the fans come to see, the fans want to see. All that is like super, super important. And it's kind of the direction that professional golf is needed to go in. It's something that I've known for a very, very long time. It's something that I feel like there's always been this sort of unsaid, well, sometimes it is said, tension between the star players and the rank and file players. And it just seemed like no one really had a solution for like how this was going to go moving forward. Like I felt like there were so many things that could be potentially done to make professional golf a lot better, where the star players could realize more of their earnings potential, while the rank and file players still were able to receive proper compensation, fair compensation. Except, look, it's very clear that the stars are always what's driven the value in professional golf. I don't think anyone has any questions about that. You could read all of the different articles, all of the different quotes from Phil Mickelson, Tiger Woods, going all the way back to Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer. Everybody knows that stars in golf are what drives revenue. That's obviously the case. That being said, there's a very important balance because, the rank and file players on the PGA Tour and all the other tours throughout the world, they play a very, very important role in this. And I think it's something that I feel like we're now at this particular point where we're looking at a brand new professional golf world moving forward. And I think now is the time, if we were to sort of blow things up and sort of have a brand new golf ecosystem, how would that look? And sort of what would the breakdown be as far as, equity, as far as value, in terms of who the investors are, in terms of how the actual product would look. And when I say product, I mean the actual golf tournaments, the events, all those things that sort of feed into the professional golf world. And again, in this particular instance, because we're dealing with the merger of these three bodies, LIV Golf and the PIF, who's the primary investor, the PGA Tour and everything around the PGA Tour, and the European Tour / DP World Tour. All of these things are now sort of moving under the same umbrella, where I think we're going to have I'm still very optimistic that this is going to go a particular way, because again, things are shifting to a for-profit world rather than this sort of antiquated not-for-profit system that the PGA Tour has had for a very long time, which, I mean, let's be honest, we're just moving into a world where that's just not viable. It's not feasible anymore. It's creating more problems than it should. And I think, look, we just have to address these two things. So really, the first thing that we have to address is sort of the general economics of golf. The second thing is NuCo / Umbrella Corporation. How is that going to look? Like, what does that even mean? What does it mean to have this sort of for-profit entity? And how is this going to look going forward? So let's talk about NuCo first, aka Umbrella Corporation, aka PGA Tour Enterprises, whatever you want to call it. You'll know what I'm talking about. So basically, the PGA Tour and its merger with LIV and the PIF and the DP World Tour, it's basically going to be taking all of their combined assets. So I'm going to sort of give you a visualization to sort of how I see this playing out. So basically, all three entities are sort of pooling in all of their assets. What do I mean by assets? So we're talking about certain tournaments, talk about certain events. And tournaments, I mean, sort of on the PGA Tour, obviously all of the legacy events, the 45 to 47 PGA Tour events that happen every year. We're also talking about media rights. We're talking about their TV contract, where they're obviously able to broadcast this particular product in the United States and also across the globe. We're also talking about all of the sponsorship that the PGA Tour brings to the table. That's another pretty huge asset. I've heard the sort of assets of the sort of media and sort of TV stuff. You get a lot of numbers out there, but I've heard the sort of number of $5 billion through the next X amount of years, which seems about right. So you obviously have that as those are all really, really important assets. And yeah, there's probably a few other things that I'm leaving out, like the, President's Cup and stuff like that. So that's they're sort of pooling all of their assets. DP World Tour, similar stuff. They have a lot of events. Look, I don't think we should gloss over the European Tour. The European Tour has a very, very important legacy of great events, a legacy of great players, a legacy of tradition that, has to be accounted for in all of this. And I think that it will. So again, but similar stuff to the PGA Tour. The assets look very, very similar. Events and tournaments, media, various things. The Ryder Cup on the European Tour side is it's an important thing. I don't know exactly how that's going to incorporate. That could be an asset that they bring in, sort of their share of the Ryder Cup. We'll have to see. Then we sort of get into the LIV Golf PIF side and bringing their assets to the table. Now, what are the LIV Golf assets? Obviously, look, LIV is a very sort of it's a new product. It's only really been around for a year and a half. We're really in a situation where 2022 was sort of year zero. 2023 was year one of LIV Golf. And really the biggest asset that LIV Golf, and they're bringing in a lot of the similar assets. They're bringing in their events, they're bringing in tournaments, they're bringing in certain media rights, they're bringing the value of their teams. That's still on the rise, obviously. Their TV contract's not worth nearly as much as what the PGA Tour is. But again, there's something very, very important when it comes to a really important asset that LIV and the PIF have that the PGA Tour and the European Tour have never had in their history. And their biggest asset is the guarantee of talent, meaning you have contracted some of the biggest names in professional golf for multiple years that are guaranteed. Of course, this is barring injury, all that other stuff, that are guaranteed to play in a certain series of events. I cannot stress how important this is to the whole thing, because the PGA Tour, for all of its legacy and tradition, the PGA Tour is not a league. It is not a sports league. It never has been. Every other professional sports league, they run in this situation where you have contracts, you have guaranteed contracts for certain players that that they are a very important asset to you, where if their teams are playing on a certain day at a certain venue, that you're going to get those assets are going to be part of your league, part of your organization. This has been one of the biggest gripes that I've had with the PGA Tour. It's one of their biggest weaknesses, that they are really just an organization of somewhat random events when you really think about it. They've never had throughout their history a guarantee of any players showing up, because they don't have any sort of guaranteed contracts. They have very specific rules where you can't pay appearance fees, which is basically what LIV Golf and those guaranteed contracts are doing. You're basically structuring these sort of appearance fees that have occurred in professional golf in the past. For example, this is something that I just tweeted recently, is that, Tiger Woods for a long time was getting appearance fees. Like, this goes back to the late 90s, early 2000s, where he was getting, $1 million appearance fees to play on the European Tour. He was getting $1 million appearance fees to sort of play in various events throughout the world. And this sort of culminated with, within the last 10 to 15 years, he was getting, a $3+ million appearance fees to go play in Dubai. Which in a sort of regular, sort of standard PGA Tour world, Dubai has nothing to do with the PGA Tour. It's a legacy European Tour event, DP World Tour event, where for the longest time, obviously, United Arab Emirates and the city of Dubai wanted more and more talent to sort of come and play in their event, because it gave them legitimacy, it gave them credibility, it gave them more eyeballs, it gave them more, just sort of raised their importance and value in the sort of professional golf universe, which is a very, very important thing. Don't get me wrong, like these appearance fees, honestly, Tiger was probably underpaid with his $3 million appearance fee, because look, I never really paid attention to the Dubai Desert Classic until Tiger started playing there in the 2000s. So I'd known about it, obviously, with, Ernie Els playing there and some of the other big name players that played a little bit more frequently on the European Tour. But, Tiger took that event to another level. So again, these appearance fees have been around. They haven't been around for the PGA Tour. They've, finagled some other ways where they've been able to funnel money to certain players for playing in certain PGA Tour events. I know the Travelers, which is in Hartford, Connecticut, is probably the best example of that. you can Google, Travelers Championship appearance fees, and you'll get a bunch of articles, talking about the ways that various sort of strategic ways that they paid appearance fees without paying appearance fees. So again, but these are really, really important things. Like that's one of the things that I think is really, really important to the whole grand scheme of professional golf and making it as good as it can be and making pro golf as big as it can be. You've got to be able to guarantee that, like, for a certain series of events, like every big name player is going to be there. And it's something that has never really been, formalized. The only thing where you can maybe say that this happened is with the majors that, obviously they're basically taking the top 50 to 100 players throughout the world. They're taking a combination of qualifiers and all that other stuff, where, all of those players are getting together 4 times a year. Basically those are the primary events where you were pretty much guaranteed to get all the top players. Now, if you go back in history and look at a lot of these PGA Tour events that, like, you think are like really, really big events, like Riviera, and looking at Bay Hill and like all these other sort of important legacy events on the PGA Tour, like, it was very infrequent that all of the best players throughout the world were actually playing in those particular tournaments. And I had a really big problem with that, because it's like the PGA Tour, for all of its legacy and tradition, they were never able to to guarantee all of the best players were going to be in any field. There was no way to do that. There's still no way for them to do that. Like, they've tried to do it with these signature events last year, where they said, oh, in order to be eligible for the PIP, you have to play an X amount of events. You're still not guaranteeing that the top players are going to play in all of those events. You're just not. You can threaten them with sort of fines and sanctions, like they did with Rory when he took his mental health thing for the Heritage last year. And it's like, again, it's just the PGA Tour is not set up to do that. Now, what you could do, which is where LIV has come in and is guaranteed for the 14 events that they have, the players that they have signed to contracts, the guaranteed contracts, are going to be playing in those events. I cannot stress how important that is to this whole ecosystem, this whole deal, being able to guarantee who's going to be playing at each one of these tour stops, at each one of these LIV Golf tournaments throughout the year. Not even talking about the team stuff, which I'm not really going to go into detail about. Except this is really, to me, is the most important part of LIV Golf, is that they are totally changing the economics of professional golf. And look, there's been this trade-off between being sort of an independent contractor and being a member of this tour, where there's been a give and take. And it's like, I still think there's so many gaps in terms of where players can just randomly decide, oh, even though this is a really big event, I don't want to play in it for a variety of reasons. I'm not contractually obligated to play in it. That needs to change. And I think that's what this merger is going to result in eventually. Now, how long that takes is another story. Obviously, we're probably looking at the merger sort of being finalized sometime in 2024. We'll have to see. Again, like, look, I have been a proponent of this merger for a long time, ever since it was announced back in June of 2020. Now, knowing more of the things that are going on behind the scenes, I'm not entirely sure if I actually want the merger to go through at this point. I just think that the golf establishment and the PGA Tour has done so many negative things. I think they've lied in the media. I think that they have pushed narratives in the media that are not true. I think that they still continue to do this. I still think that they have not learned any lessons over the last couple of years. And I think that they, in a lot of ways, think that they could keep getting away with the things that they're continuing to do. And I'm not going to get into the details because I don't want this to be a 3-hour podcast. So again, we'll have to see how things play out. I still think that it probably will. The merger will probably go through its at some point in the next few months, but we will have to see. So, NuCo. I've talked a little bit about the assets that all of the various entities are putting in the middle of the table. Now, when you have a for-profit entity, I think that it's really important what they're doing, and I've been kind of tipped off to this, and it also is the only thing that makes sense. I mean, really, when you think about it and break it down, when you have a for-profit entity, how are you going to structure it? I think that you wind up taking all of these assets that you've accumulated between these three entities. You start lifting out the things that are the most valuable parts of each of those asset groups. So, for example, LIV Golf. I think it's very, very clear the most valuable assets they have are the players that they have contracted. And then also, there's really three events that like come to my mind as the ones that are really the most interesting, the ones that are the best attended, the ones that the host venue has actually paid them to. I mean, the host venue and the actual government body has actually paid LIV Golf to host these events for X amount of years. The three that sort of stand out to me at this particular point are obviously LIV Golf Adelaide, LIV Golf Andalusia, which is the Valderrama tournament in Spain. And then the third one gets a little bit tricky. I think it's probably either going to be Singapore or Hong Kong. And the reason why I talk about those two is because those two are long-term contracts where those two places have contracted LIV Golf, paid them tens of millions of dollars to host events in that particular for those particular events. Sorry, I'm still a little sick, and you might have to deal with a little bit of coughing, but it is what it is. So those are really valuable assets, I think, for LIV. I think that you're taking those and you're sort of putting that in the middle of the pot. You're also taking your most valuable asset, which is the player contracts, and you're putting that in the pot where you're able to say, okay, we're going to guarantee that these players are going to play in this sort of for-profit entity. So that's sort of one example of sort of the assets that LIV is putting in, and then people are going to joke about how LIV doesn't the assets aren't that valuable, but it's like, look, when you spent $2, $3, $4 billion and sort of invested that in all of these great players that people around the world want to see, trust me, that has value. You don't need to be rocket scientist to figure that out. That 100% has value. I think that the teams also have value. The teams are sort of another sort of story that I don't know if I'm going to have time to sort of get into today, but eventually I do think the teams are actually going to be where a lot of the inherent value and sort of equity to the top players is going to lie. So again, just keeping things short, I'm pushing all of those into the middle of the table. I'm lifting those out. I'm putting my chips in the table to say, okay, LIV Golf, PIF, these are my most valuable assets that I'm bringing to the table. And I'm also bringing a war chest full of money. But that's another story too. So we got all that. Then the PGA Tour, now it's like I'm thinking about, okay, the PGA Tour, what's the most valuable assets that we have? We can't guarantee that players are going to show up at these events. Now, I think one of the reasons why this merger is taking longer than it I probably should, is because this is something that they have to figure out. They have to figure out a way to guarantee that all of the top players on the PGA Tour are going to be part of this umbrella NuCo series of events. So, and I'll get into sort of what that series is going to look like after I sort of talk about all the various asset groups. So the PGA Tour biggest assets are their legacy events, these events that carry a lot of inherent value. They have a very strong identity. They have a history. They have very, very strong sponsorship. They have, very strong sort of TV and media rights. Now, this certainly carries a lot of value to it. Has it been devalued a little bit with all of the players that have gone to LIV? I mean, you could say that, but you could also tomorrow, the PGA Tour could say, look, we're lifting all bans on the players that went to LIV. We're going to invite a few of those to play in certain PGA Tour events. And then boom, like the value is, if it went down a little bit, is right back to where it should be. So I think what's going to happen is that they are taking the most valuable PGA Tour events. So we're talking, I sort of listed a few that I thought were pretty good candidates for this. The Players Championship obviously carries a lot of value to it. I mean, what the actual valuation of that is, and I can, I've sort of tapped into, again, the private equity world and sort of gotten a little bit more information about how, what valuation we're actually talking about if we are going to take these events and sort of spin them off into various franchises. So again, obviously PGA Tour does not have the option like an NFL or NBA where you have these various teams, you have these various franchises that carry a lot of value to them. And they're owned by very, very wealthy people and families and such. What you do have are you have these particular events, these are particular golf tournaments that are tied to very specific locales, specific regions. And I think that there are people that would love to own these events. Perfect example, talking about the Players Championship. I've heard that it seems like the players, if you were to sort of franchise that out, sort of what would the value of that franchise be? I've heard various estimates that the players itself carries about a $1 billion valuation. If you were to have a group of people, ownership group, basically take on that tournament and sort of make it a franchise. And look, the Players Championship is a very, very important event. It's got a lot of legacy and tradition to it. It's always been one of the biggest events of the PGA Tour season. It's where the PGA Tour's headquarters is. It's got a very strong identity, very strong ties to the Jacksonville, Florida area. It carries a lot of value. It's extremely well attended. I think that viewership is pretty good. I mean, they get usually probably 3 million viewers, maybe 4 on a good year. Like, those are pretty strong numbers. So I think that has a certain value to it. And on the sort of converse, one of the other events that has kind of fallen on harder times the last probably 10 years, but it still has a very strong brand. It still has a very strong identity. Even though the sponsor recently, 40 plus year sponsor recently left. And that's the old Honda Classic that's held in Palm Beach Gardens. Now, obviously, Palm Beach Gardens and Palm Beach in general, huge hotbed of golf. I think that tournament has very strong identity tied to that golf course, PGA National. I think it's also very, very well attended. I've heard that over the course of a week they get like 200,000 people attending that particular event. The field hasn't been that strong the last 10 years. I remember Tiger used to play, Rory used to play every year. It hasn't really been the case the last few years. Again, it sort of goes into all of a sudden you realize the value of these particular events. A lot of it is tied into the players that actually play in these events. So, again, if you're able to lift out this particular event, the old Honda Classic that's now being called, I believe, the Cognizant Classic, because that's the new sponsor that they brought in. We'll see how that sort of switches out. I've already said that they've got to figure something out with these names, and especially when it comes to this for-profit entity, they've got to figure out a way so that every single event has an identity. So they're not flipping names every few years. Like, it's got to be, oh, this event is at PGA National. It's the old Honda Classic. It's always on this course at PGA National in Palm Beach. I know all of the sort of top golfers in the world, whether they play on LIV or the PGA Tour, DP World Tour, wherever, they're all going to be playing in this particular tournament. You've got to figure out a way to give that tournament more of a stronger identity. Now, that particular event's not going to have the same value as the players that already has a very strong identity. It's a very important tournament, very strong brand, very strong sponsors. Obviously, Honda Classic, Cognizant Classic is a little weaker there. I've heard that the valuation of the Honda Classic probably about $100 million, probably maybe a little more than that. This is just a number to sort of give you guys food for thought. I'm not saying that's exactly how much it's worth. These are just numbers that I've gotten from various sources over the course of the last, year's time. So, and then you have, between the players and the Honda, you've got a bunch of other events in there that their valuation is probably in between that. You've got a tournament like the Waste Management Phoenix Open, which is the best attended golf tournament probably in the world. They get 600,000 or 700,000 people. They've got the stadium hole. They got all of that stuff. It's a legacy event that's been around for like 90 years. Everybody knows the Phoenix Open. A lot of people don't know that it wasn't that long ago that it wasn't called the Waste Management Phoenix Open. Like, they've relatively new sponsor. It used to be called like the FBR Open. And again, this is another tournament that's had very, I think that they've gotten a stronger brand to sort of sponsor it now, where everybody knows what the Waste Management Phoenix Open is. Like, it has a very strong identity. What happens if Waste Management decides to, like, you know what, we don't want to sponsor this anymore? All of a sudden, becomes another FBR Open. It becomes, whatever company wants to come in and sort of sponsor it. Maybe it's the Aramco Phoenix Open. Like, that's certainly something that it could be. I think we need to get rid of that model. If these, again, this is something that I'm going to continue to hammer home. If we want this to be for profit, every single one of these events that carries value to it, and you want to see the value of this event go up over time, it's very important. Every single event needs to have an identity. I think the Phoenix Open has a very strong identity now. You have to protect this identity going into the future. So, and then again, there's other sort of tournaments you can sort of spin off and sort of franchise them as well. A couple others that I've thought of: Arnold Palmer Invitational at Bay Hill, very strong brand tied to Arnold Palmer in the Orlando area. Again, it's another really well attended event. Orlando, Florida is a very sort of important hotbed of golf. I think that carries a lot of weight to it. The Memorial tied to Jack Nicklaus. Again, it's not called the MasterCard Memorial. It's called the Memorial Tournament. Like, it's got a very specific identity, a very specific brand. When you hear the Memorial, you know what that tournament is. You know where it's going to be. You know Jack Nicklaus is going to be waiting on 18, waiting to congratulate the winner. That tournament certainly carries value to it. No question about it. Then you start getting into other ones, like the Travelers, I think, is one that's could have some value to it. You got the old Wells Fargo, which is now losing Wells Fargo as a sponsor. That's in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's very well attended. Doesn't necessarily have the same branding as those other ones. I'm not sure. I think it's one that's kind of like a potential sort of put into this particular pot, especially because, again, I think it's a good market. Charlotte sort of has a reputation for sort of turning out for professional golf, and I think that it's an event that sort of has a certain identity and a certain brand, maybe not as high as some of those others. Then you have something like the Genesis Invitational at Riviera. Used to be called the old LA Open. It's where Tiger made his professional debut in 1992. It's got a lot of legacy to it. Obviously, the LA Open goes back a very, very, very long time. Like we're talking basically 100 years. Now, here's the thing people don't really understand about Riviera is that the infrastructure of that particular event. And look, I have been to the LA Open many, many times over the years. It's not necessarily the best attended events on the PGA Tour. It's not even close. I think that when Tiger took it over and he started playing in that event more, because there was a time where he was not playing in this event at all. Going back to the 2000s, like he was skipping it. So, and when he didn't play, like the attendance was nowhere near. They were not getting like 200,000 people over the course of a week. They were getting, I mean, probably closer. It was probably under 50,000 for the week, if I had to guess, if I had to ballpark it, which is not bad. I think that it's a great course. I think that it does have a certain brand to it. The course is a really important course. It's a great legacy course that a lot of players love. It carries value, no question about it. It's got a fairly strong sponsor. I think Genesis is a decent sponsor. Hyundai is sort of a longtime PGA Tour sponsor, is sort of sponsored various events. I think Genesis, that particular brand, is sponsoring multiple PGA Tour events. They're a strong sponsor, no question about it. Now, does that particular event carry the value of some of the others? I'm not sure. Again, food for thought. I just gave you 7, 8 events that they could potentially lift out of the PGA Tour. These are very, very important assets that we're bringing to the table. You can sort of add up the value of that. It's probably a couple $1 billion, maybe $3 billion. You're going to franchise off each one of those tournaments. You're going to have various folks, whether they be folks that are part of Strategic Sports Group, which is a private equity company that's come in to, contribute $3+ billion to this NuCo company, umbrella corporation. They could easily own several of these events, maybe all of these events, and basically have ownership groups that actually own these events that carry value, that they want to see increase in value over time. So we talked about, and again, the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour, European Tour, very similar model. European Tour's got some other legacy of events that probably carry a fair amount of value. I think Wentworth BMW Championship, very important legacy event on that tour. It's been very well attended. It's got great sponsorship. Usually has a pretty strong field. It's got an identity, definitely a strong identity. Scottish Open, again, sponsored by Genesis. That might be one that they sort of bring in and sort of push to the table. You got the Dubai Desert Classic. Again, I talked about that a little bit. It's got legacy now. Rory's won it a few times. Tiger's won it a few times. Like a lot of big names have won it. I think it's got identity. I think it's got value. That part of the world, obviously, is the Middle East is becoming a very, very important part of the sort of golf world, professional golf world, and I think that it's going to continue to be that way. Dubai being a very important city in that, as well as Saudi also being an important contributor, obviously. So again, we're taking all of these assets and we're like, okay, European Tour, what do you have? What do you want to contribute? PGA Tour, what do you have? What are you going to contribute? LIV Golf, PIF, what do you got? What are you going to contribute? All these things, you're taking these events, you're taking all of these assets. This is what you're creating to create NuCo / Umbrella Corporation and sort of this elevated series of events that, again, like I said previously, we only had, especially the last couple of years, the majors are the only 4 tournaments where you're guaranteed, you're not even guaranteed anymore if the majors don't sort of step it up. You're basically getting the majority of the top players playing in those events. The only way that this is going to be more profitable into the future is that you have to use this NuCo to create all these other events that maybe they're not quite at the level of the majors, but they're pretty damn close, where you're guaranteed to get various fields of various sizes playing in all of these events that I've already mentioned that are now part of this umbrella corporation, where they all carry their own inherent value. They are all franchised, where the owners of each one of those tournaments now is responsible for increasing the value of those tournaments over the course of time. Again, I think the ways that you get there are, one, everything has to have an extremely strong identity. It's critical to this. Everything has to have a brand, just like the Masters has an important brand. The US Open has an important brand. The PGA Championship has a brand. Open Championship has a brand. Maybe you're creating this series of, let's say, 12 events. Let's just sort of net out at 12, where, so now instead of just having the 4 majors, you've also got these 12 events where you're guaranteed to get all of the top players in there that now have very strong identities that are tied to specific regions. They're not necessarily tied to sponsors, because that sponsorship name where you're flipping every few years, you're just not really creating a strong identity to those tournaments anymore. You're just not. I'm not saying those sponsors shouldn't still be involved. They absolutely should. I think that that's obviously another really strong revenue stream. It's something you want to keep injecting into this sort of for-profit model. Because again, if you're for-profit, you want as many sponsors as possible. Except again, you have to do it in a very, very smart way, where you are encouraging more people to watch. You are creating a more compelling TV product, where you can have this sort of global series of events, of 12 events that I've already talked about, sort of various places where this is tied to. It's not just tied to the United States. It's tied to Australia. It's tied to continental Europe. It's tied to the UK. It's tied to Asia. And maybe you want to squeeze in, maybe there's a little bit of flexibility where you can move some of these events to other parts of the world that really want it. Certainly another option. But again, I think that it's critical that each one of these things have an identity to it. And I think that's going to be critical to the success of this going forward. And that's really where, like, a lot of people are saying, oh, you're just rebooting the World Golf Championships, but you're not, because one, when they did have the World Golf Championships throughout the world, it was very rare, again, that they were getting all the best players. You know, I remember Tiger sitting out a lot of those events. I remember a lot of the big names not going because they didn't want to compromise their schedules on the PGA Tour and all that other stuff. Because again, the biggest weakness to that whole model, whether it be the World Golf Championships or the PGA Tour, it was not a league. It was not, all it was a very vague organization that wasn't really organized, let's be honest. where you're not guaranteed to get the best players. That's what you have to move towards. You got to build this thing so that you're guaranteed to get all the players that everybody wants to see, not just 4 times a year. You bump that up to like 16 times a year. So that sort of gives you a little bit of an idea when it comes to NuCo, sort of having it be a for-profit company. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of micro stuff in there that we could sort of, haggle on, but I really want to give you that sort of macro view of what in the world does a for-profit entity look like in this particular case. Again, just to summarize, you're taking the most valuable assets of all the people that are involved. You are elevating the things that carry the most value of each of those, and you're milking that for all that it's worth, and you're increasing the value of that over time. It's the only way this is going to work. It's really the only way that I can see that we're guaranteed to grow golf and grow this umbrella core NuCo into the future. Okay. So now that we've talked about NuCo, let's talk a little bit about the economics of golf and sort of where things need to go into the future. And again, we've talked a little bit about, we've got these various sort of competing priorities. We've got the rank and file players that want one thing. We've got the star players that want something else. Now we've got the 2 primary investors, 2 primary benefactors that are coming into professional golf, the Saudi PIF, and we also have Strategic Sports Group, which is sort of a conglomerate of very wealthy folks that are mostly based here in the U.S. That are, very wealthy folks that have, I think the last time I saw, I think the combined net worth of these folks was something like $80 billion or something like that. Certainly nothing to sort of, nothing to take lightly. Except when you also have the Saudi PIF that's worth, closer to 800 billion. That's certainly something you don't want to take lightly either. So you've got these competing priorities, competing entities. Strategic Sports Group, the last number that I heard, they are probably going to be injecting this NuCo with roughly anywhere between $3 billion and $3.5 billion. So then you also have the Saudi PIF that's probably going to commit, probably about the same amount of value, the same amount of money into this particular organization. So I could see that being kind of a 50-50 split. Certainly seems fair. And then on top of that, obviously you've got the investors and the owners now. And again, I'm going to draw these parallels between the sort of new way that golf looks and sort of how professional sports, especially here in the U.S., because that's what I know, how that looks here in the U.S. So you've got your ownership groups and your investors. They're basically carrying 50% of the value of all this. The other 50%, we're talking about, again, the rank and file players, which is the 400 or so plus players that aren't the top players that really drive interest and stuff like that, but they're very important to the ecosystem, sort of various sort of scales within that. And then you have the star players, the ones that actually drive interest. Your Phil Mickelsons, your Tigers, your John Rahms, your Rory McIlroys, Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, Bryson DeChambeau, all those guys that, let's be honest, those guys probably carry 15 to 20 times the value of sort of the average rank and file player. Like, that's kind of where I think things net out. Those guys carry a lot of value, and honestly, you could probably take the top 15 to 20 of those players, and we could sort of haggle over who those names are, again, I don't want this to be a 3-hour podcast, so I'm not really going to go into detail, but you could talk about all those guys. Like those 15 to 20 probably carry as much value, or maybe even more value than the rest of the other players on the PGA Tour and LIV and the European Tour combined. So again, because those two groups are so completely different, it's very hard to put them all under the same category. I just don't think you can do that. So what do I think needs to happen is the fact that obviously we've got this 50% ownership, Saudi PIF, Strategic Sports Group, 50% talent. We're talking the superstars, star players, and we're talking rank and file players. 50-50 split. 25% PIF, 25% Strategic Sports Group, 25% to the top star players, 15 to 20, and then 25% to the rank and file players. Now, I'm not strictly talking about equity here. I need to be abundantly clear on this. The way this is sort of broken down in, let's just use the NBA because it's the one that I know best and it's something that I've studied the economics of the NBA for, probably 30 years at this point, ever since I was in grade school. It's just crazy when I think about that. Anyway, it hasn't always been 50-50. It's been like, 57-43, 57% player, the players, 43% owners. For argument's sake, we're just going to make it 50-50. And basically what it is you're taking, the overall pie of the economics of the NBA. Let's say it's $10 billion. You are always promising that the way that salaries are structured in that particular league, the players are always going to be entitled to 50% of that. So if the revenue goes up, players are going to make out like bandits. If it stays flat, they're still going to do great, but it basically incentivizes everyone that North Star is always going to be, we want to grow this thing because it's going to be the path so that all of us get the maximum amount of revenue. Now, obviously, golf is a little bit more complicated, which is why we don't just have the 50-50 split between team ownership and the players. We have sort of multiple ownership groups, and then we have these two very, very specific groups of players. One of the things where I think you can balance this out is, again, using U.S. sports as an example. You could certainly figure this out using prize money as it currently stands on the PGA Tour and LIV and the DP World Tour. You could. I think we need to move away from prize money for a variety of reasons because, one, I just think it's... There's been so much talk about money in professional golf the last couple of years. I know that a lot of people are tired of it, no question. And honestly, I just want to know that players are being fairly compensated. I don't really care what they make exactly. I just want to know that everybody's happy with what they're getting. And there's this inherent sort of push and pull. There's a balance. There's checks and balances to make sure that all players are being compensated the way that they should be. And everyone is incentivized to grow this thing because if it grows, then everybody's gonna make out, better than they were. Now, under this model, again, you can keep prize money, but I do think that we should probably move to a salary model where you have structured salaries, you have, top salaries for the more important players, the bigger players, star players, sort of lesser salaries for, rookies and things like that. And there's sort of a sliding scale within there. Certainly possible. But I do think that the teams are really where you have the most amount of growth potential. Where expanding it, look, I know when I start talking about teams in golf, certain people their eyes sort of glaze over because it's so new and it's so people don't fully understand it, and they start thinking about it only in terms of like LIV Golf and like the teams specifically at LIV. What I'm talking about when I talk about teams is expanding on that sort of LIV Golf model, where you have these sort of 4-player teams. Currently we've got 12 to 13 teams. Stay tuned for that. Might be more. Sort of a teaser. So I think you could potentially have a situation where you have way more players on these teams, and they're not only LIV Golf teams. Like let's say, for example, we have, again, if we want these sort of top 15 to 20 players to all have their own teams, you could have a situation, and I wrote an article on this, I guess it was about a month ago, sort of talking about how we could potentially do that. I definitely highly recommend everybody reads it. If you go to my Twitter, you go to my Medium profile, it'll be talking about the pro golf landscape in 2028. If I sort of ran professional golf. So I think you can have a situation where you have, let's say Rory McIlroy own one of these teams, where, look, Rory's kind of committed to playing in mostly in PGA Tour events. He'll be playing in the Global Series. He'll probably be playing in, 2 to 3 LIV events, probably, maybe. Except he doesn't necessarily have to play in those LIV events. He could have a team where he designates 4 players on his team that are going to play in the LIV Invitational Series, the LIV Golf League, where depending on their performance in that league, sort of how well they do, they're bringing in money and they're contributing that to the team to sort of increase the overall value of these teams, where previously you might have had this situation where you had all these sort of sponsors sort of putting in money in certain events. Is that really the best way for them to sort of increase their brand appeal? I don't know if it is. Like this sort of commercial model where you have these big companies that are paying for commercial time. I know personally there's been so many commercials in professional golf that when I see a company that has the same commercial and they're running over and over again every hour during these PGA Tour events, like I actually start to have a negative view of that company. So I don't know if those commercials are necessarily the best way for them to get the most amount of value out of sponsoring professional golf. I think that there's other more creative ways. And I think one of those ways is, instead of funneling that money into the TV, you funnel that money into the teams, where those companies, now these sort of traditional golf sponsors that have been involved in golf for decades, or some of the newer ones as well, they're now sort of funneling money into the teams, where you have a particular team sponsored by BMW, you have a team sponsored by Rolex, you have a team sponsored by Callaway, all of these other things, TaylorMade maybe too. And those teams, just like the sort of F1 model that we have, where you have multiple sponsors, you got like Aramco, you have all these other, companies sponsor, you have Red Bull, you have, all these other car manufacturers and like tires and like all these things that are involved in like auto racing. They're sponsoring teams. You could potentially have that in golf now, where you have these teams that, and yes, they're going to be competing at LIV. However, they're also going to have members of these teams that are competing in sort of PGA Tour events. And they're also competing in this global series that, again, if you are increasing the value of that global series, you're getting more people to watch those events those events become the most important events of the entire calendar year in golf. Those are the ones that get the most amount of eyeballs. Those become these near majors that, like, the ratings are probably going to be like, maybe not at like Masters level, but they're going to be at that sort of Players Championship level, maybe US Open, PGA Championship, like in that range. That's where you could potentially really start to sort of amplify the the sponsors, where they're starting to get more value sponsoring these teams than they are in the sort of old traditional commercial model. Again, this is a huge macro level shift that I'm saying could happen. Do I think it's going to happen? I think it will. The reason why, again, I think that we have to start thinking about this. Everybody out there, you've got to stop thinking about golf how it was 10 years ago. It's never going to be like that again, I promise you. We're moving into a brand new world of professional golf. The teams are always going to be around. There's no question about it. Will it look different? Will LIV potentially look different? Will there be less LIV events? Like, instead of 14, could I see there being 10? Sure. I think that the PGA Tour is going to have less events. Again, because in this franchise model, it's sort of inevitable that if you have too many events, it lessens the value of each one of those franchises. So you have to start picking some out. You got to start contracting. It's the only way that's going to really sort of drive interest, where instead of having way too many events and conflicting events and all that other stuff, like, you're really starting to put together a golf schedule that makes more sense. You're starting to put together a golf schedule that's going to garner more attention. You're going to start putting together a golf schedule that's got all the best players in more of the events. This is the only way to drive this thing forward. I'm very, very convinced of that. So, and again, the amount of players playing in each one of these events is sort of a story for another day. It's a micro level thing. Really, the intention of this is to get everybody thinking about how this could be into the future, because my number one complaint about professional golf, and I've tweeted about this constantly over the last year, has been that we've been totally stuck in this sort of old professional golf model that sort of started in the mid to late 1960s, that is like totally ignoring that we're moving into a world that looks totally different than it did in 1968. I think that we are seeing a little bit of decentralization in terms of funding, in terms of sponsors, in terms of general interest in other parts of the world, outside of the United States. And to me, again, it's the only way that you're going to grow golf. And I think that I have, if I haven't made this point in this podcast, like, I'm failing at my job, because I feel like I've said this probably 20 times. The only way that you're going to grow golf is you have to expand out from what it is now. Like, this old model that we've had is not the path forward, because let's be honest, after Tiger Woods started going downhill and sort of playing less events, starting to have his injuries, he had his car accident, all that other stuff, he's not going to play in that many events going forward. He's just not. And everybody needs to, like, let that sink in, that Tiger's not going to be around that much longer. He really isn't. I would love to still see him play in a few events here and there, but that shouldn't be the expectation at all. We've got to figure out a better way to push this thing into the future that's going to drive interest. What I've just proposed to you with this sort of restructuring of golf, the restructuring of the calendar, the restructuring of how everything works, I think that's really the path forward to make golf as big as it could be on sort of a global scale, where you have this global series of events, including the majors at the very, very top. You still have the PGA Tour running independently. You have LIV Golf running independently. You have the DP World Tour running independently. And look, I don't think there's any question there's going to be contraction. There's going to be events that get scrapped. I think that's the best thing for the health of the game, and I think that needs to happen. And you're still going to have, so you've got these sort of 16 events, that are the things that the entire golf world revolves around. And you also have like these players that are mostly playing in this global series. You're still going to have a lot of those guys playing in the additional 7 live events there are, where that's going to they're going to play in roughly 23, 24 events. I think that's fair. Maybe some of the older players, there might be something you could do for any player over, I don't know, 35 to 40. Maybe they aren't playing in quite as many events. Maybe there's a handful of global series that they don't have to play in. These are things that can be worked out, for sure. So I think that you're looking at a world where every player that wants to play in as many events as possible, they're going to be playing in roughly 24 events, 16 in the global series. And then you've got like some of these guys like Rory probably going to play like 6 additional PGA Tour events, maybe 2 others sort of scattered throughout the world, and maybe European Tour events that aren't part of the global series. I could certainly see that. And I think we just need to open this thing up so that every event that we have is, particularly as part of the global series, those events are going to be the highlights of the year. They're going to get the most amount of world ranking points, which is going to incentivize players to play in as many of those as they can. But I do think that the way forward is that you've got to contract every player to make sure they're playing in every single one of those events. Can that happen? I think that it can. I think that, again, if you're guaranteeing, the trade-off is that, yes, these players have been mostly independent contractors for however long professional golf has been going on. I think that that's got to change if this is going to be, if we want to make golf as big as it can be. We've got to turn this into a league structure. We've got to start guaranteeing that these players are playing in as many events as possible, especially in this global series and the majors. And again, I think it's the only path forward. It's the only path that makes sense. We're going to start franchising each one of these events. They're going to turn into their own sort of stops. It's going to be kind of like F1, where everything, all of these sort of global series of events, they become the center, just like F1 events in Singapore and Vegas and Austin and Miami become these events that are like really, really important to just the entire ecosystem. Like that's what I think we're sort of moving towards. And I think it's the only way that we're really going to drive interest. So I'm going to stop there because I feel like I've been going now for a little over an hour. That's been a lot to sort of take in. I may want to do something sort of add on to this because obviously things are continuing to change. We just had the deadline move back for the merger to late March, early April. There's going to be a lot of other changes that sort of happen between now and then. There's going to be more players that go over to LIV because we still have, spots that need to be filled. I've been tipped off that there's going to be more PGA Tour players that probably go. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen. I mean, look, the LIV season starts the beginning of February. If last year was any indication, I expect it to sort of come down to the deadline again. So we're looking at probably late January to sort of filling out the teams. I've already heard that the Team Rippers got 2 players on the way that are currently PGA Tour players. And we've got a couple other tour players, whether they be on the European Tour or the PGA Tour, that are going to fill in the other spots, in addition to the guys that made it through the promotions event. So we're looking at a really exciting next few months. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this stuff plays out. I feel very confident that what I've proposed with the sort of global series is going to be the path forward. Again, we'll have to see how this whole thing plays out. we certainly are potentially looking at a world where the merger doesn't happen, and then it's going to be complete chaos, which I kind of want to see at this point if I'm rooting for anything. I used to root for the merger. Now it's like I'm kind of rooting for chaos again because I'll leave you on this point. I feel like the golf establishment and the PGA Tour, they have a certain culture that they have built over the last several decades. And as much as I wanted that culture to change, it's very, very clear to me that it's not really going to change to the level that I want it to. And the only solution might be blowing up the whole thing and starting over. Do I think that that's likely? No. I still think that the most likely thing is the merger, going through, just again, like I've said on a few podcasts, might be a little bit delayed at this point. I still think it's going to happen. Is that what I'm rooting for? Not really. I want LIV Golf to be the primary tour. I want more players from the PGA Tour and the European Tour to go over. I want LIV Golf to eventually become the premier golf league in the world. I think that that's best for the global golf ecosystem. And I think that it's the only way to really change the overall culture of golf. So, and again, this is my take on it. This is my personal feelings. I know my colleagues, Mark and Ben, feel differently. Totally fine. But look, this is my solo podcast. This might be the only one. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We've got some amazing things planned going forward. We've got our first, couple sponsors that have come on board recently, including Fair Play Exchange, which is unfortunately it's not really offered here in the United States, which kind of works out for me because I don't really bet at all. And I live in the United States. But if I were in the UK and Europe, I certainly would, sign up and see what it's all about. So I encourage all of my UK and European colleagues to sort of look into that. They're a great partner. We're currently talking to a few other potential sponsors for 2024. And Golf Lovers United is definitely looking at attending a few professional golf events. I may even be attending a couple of PGA Tour events. It's TBD at this point, but conversations are currently going on, and we'll have to see how things play out. So, again, thank you for listening to this. There will be much more information to come later on down the line, but hopefully this has given you guys plenty of food for thought for now. And until next time, I will see you later.